Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Becky Robinson, and I am so thrilled today to be with Charles Feltman, the author of The Thin Book of Trust. And as you're coming into today's webinar event, I hope you'll let us know where you're calling in from today. Charles and I were speaking before the event began, and Charles, tell everyone where you're calling in from today.
I live in a town called San Luis Obispo in California, which is about halfway between San Francisco and Los Angeles, kind of on the coast. Great place.
Amazing. And I'm calling in from my office in Lambertville, Michigan. So hello to all of you who are typing in the chat. It looks like we have a caller from Sweden, Madison, Wisconsin, Orange, California, Calgary, Alberta, Maine, Tennessee, Cincinnati. Like these are coming in really fast. I forgot to
No
mention, if
kidding.
you are calling in today, as a part of your professional development, we would love to know what organization you're representing. So you can feel free to put a shout out in the chat to the organization that you're representing as you're here today for professional development. And if I'm able to, I'll try to give you a shout out. So welcome to Brian from Better Up. Glad you're here. I love that we have such an international audience today. I don't know if you can see all of those, Charles, but we've got
Yeah.
Armenia, we've got, let's see, I don't know, I saw some more. We've got Craig from Expressions of Excellence in the San Francisco Bay Area. We have Kristen from Barrett Kohler Publishers. Camilla is here representing her own company, Release Your Potential. We've got Pinnacle Leadership Associates. So thanks to all of you who are putting both your organizations and your locations in the chat. We are thrilled that you are choosing to invest some time learning with us. So before I share more about Charles and his background, I want to let you know about a few considerations for today's event. We are recording this event, and we will make the recording available so that you might be able to share it with colleagues or friends or family members who might benefit from the content. We want the chat to be an engaging place for you today, and we welcome you throughout today's event to go ahead and put your comments, your questions, your feedback in the chat. We will make sure that Charles sees that feedback after the event, and I'll be also monitoring the chat for any questions that might come up. Finally, we want this to be an inclusive community for those of you who are attending our events. We do have closed captioning available in the bottom of the Zoom panel. We invite you to turn that on if that will enhance your learning in today's event. So thanks again for being here. We're thrilled that you're investing in learning. This is going to be a time of an incredible conversation, a topic that is critical for our world today. So some background about Charles. Charles has been coaching leaders and teams and delivering leadership development programs and giving talks worldwide for over 25 years. He supports individuals, teams, and entire organizations to become more exceptional at building and maintaining strong trust as a foundation for success and well-being at work. And the book that we're celebrating today is The Thin Book of Trust, an essential primer for building trust at work. It's launching in a brand new edition from Barrett Kohler Publishers next week on September 10th. So Charles, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Really appreciate being here with you. Looking
Yes.
forward to the conversation.
Me too. And what we want to do at the start is to get some feedback and interaction from our guests, our attendees today. We would love to know a bit more about what you're experiencing in your organization as it relates to trust. So I have launched a poll. The poll says, what do you believe are the most significant barriers to trust in your organization? And you can check all that apply. Or if you check other, we would love to hear in the chat what those other issues are that are a barrier to trust in your organization. So thanks to those of you who are answering the poll. I'm going to give a few moments for you to continue responding to the poll. And I'll also be monitoring the chat to get your comments about what other barriers you might see to trust in your
Becky,
org.
can I just say something?
Oh, yes, please.
I believe some of the people who are on the call are coaches, and so they don't have a specific organization in that sense that they're thinking about. But if you're a coach, yeah, think about the organizations that you work for and respond from there.
Great idea. Thank you for that, Charles. So it looks like most people have answered. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and share those results. It looks like the number one barrier to trust, represented by this audience, is the lack of transparent communication, followed by, almost in order there, lack of accountability, insufficient team collaboration, unaddressed past issues, and to a lesser degree, folks see that frequent organizational changes erode trust. I've got some comments here about other. Uh, a leader who has very permeable and diffused interpersonal boundaries, petty behavior. Those are some other barriers to trust. And I'm curious to hear from you, Charles. How does this line up to what you would have expected?
It's pretty consistent, particularly the top two, the lack of transparent communication, which I hear from people all the time. Oh, we don't get transparent communication. We feel like things are being hidden from us. We're not part of the conversation. We're not invited into the conversation. That's from people who are working within the organization. But even the top leadership sometimes complains about lack of transparent communication upwards from those that are further down in the organization. Lack of accountability is also a big one. People see that there isn't accountability, and it damages their trust in those people that aren't being accountable, and also in the leaders that don't hold people accountable. So both of those is sort of like a double whammy on trust. Unaddressed past issues often show up. Well, those two, insufficient team collaboration, unaddressed past issues. Actually, those two often get in each other's way. So there's not team collaboration, partly because people haven't addressed stuff that's kind of lingering in the background, rotting under the carpet. And then they don't have good team collaboration, so they create new issues around that that can damage trust. So yeah, and frequent organizational changes also. I see that a lot.
We've got a few more other comments that I want to make sure I surface for us. So Peter says a challenge is building trust in a short training session. T says how to have trust under pressure with challenge, adversity, and stress. John says lack of evidence of trustworthy actions from manager, me. Well, thank you for owning that, John.
Yeah, good job.
Kirk, seeing a lot of virtual work where not enough effort is made to collaborate and build trust. And Carrie says lack of empowerment. If managers don't trust their employees, employees don't trust the manager.
All of those, yes, can definitely be. And also, if it had been one of the options, I think a barrier to trust is sort of the assumption that we are super busy. We have to stay busy. We have so much to do. We don't even have time to build relationship with each other. We don't have time to get our work done and show up as reliable for each other. So just simply the speed at which people are working, which doesn't necessarily have to be that way, but that's the way it is, the culture of the organization, and so many organizations are dealing with that. That speed makes trust building challenging, and repairing trust if there's a breach or a betrayal of trust. It takes time to do that. It takes time to repair that. And so if everybody's running around at top speed, that doesn't get to happen.
Well, and I know that we're going to address that in greater detail later, and I'm really interested to hear what you have to say. A couple more others that are bubbling up: feelings about positional power and hierarchy as a barrier of building trust. And Michael's saying we're in a time of low trust as a society as a whole, and it's a global problem that we bring with us to work.
That's a good point. Yes, I think it's a great observation. We work within the culture, the soup, if you will, that we live as a whole society, as a larger political organization, or political entity as well. And that distrust infects to some degree. Although I also would say that um, I can see within organizations islands of trust in that larger. So sometimes organizations, companies um, are places where people can build trust with each other more effectively than in the larger society.
That would be a great organization to be a part of, I'm sure. Well, so let's get back to the basics. And I would love to hear, Charles, for the purposes of this book and the purposes of your work in the world, would you share your definition of trust?
Yes, I define trust as choosing to risk making something you value vulnerable to another person's actions. I'll just say that again. Choosing to risk making something you value vulnerable to another person's actions. So when I use that definition, offer that definition to people, whether it's a team or a company or in some other context, offer that definition to people and ask what shows up for you in there. What are the key words that kind of pop out for you? Risk, vulnerability, and value, some things that I value. What are those things that I value that I'm risking? And you kind of conversely, you can look and say, okay, what am I not risking that I value? What am I holding back, in which case I'm not trusting? So those three things are when I work with coaching clients, either one-on-one or with teams, having the conversation of what are the things that we value? And why is it that we're hesitant to risk those? Or when we do risk those, why? Especially if the stakes are high, why do we risk that? What are we hoping to accomplish in building trust in this relationship by taking that risk? Being vulnerable. And again, it's kind of ironic. I love Brene Brown's focus on vulnerability in her work. She's saying, hey, vulnerability is a risky place to be at work. And that yet if we can't be vulnerable with each other, we won't build strong relationships. And trust is part of that. Trust is part of every relationship we have in some way or another, or distrust.
Yeah, that makes so much sense to me. And I think that what I have experienced, Charles, is that the more vulnerable I am, like the more real and authentic I am, the more satisfying the relationship is that develops.
Yes, I would agree with that. Um, so trust is important in order to work well with other people. We can all kind of figure that out. There's been research that shows that trust is within organizations, trust between people in organizations positively affects productivity, it positively affects results, it positively affects revenue, it positively affects the bottom line, profitability. So research has shown all of these things. So encouraging trust, encouraging people, creating a context or a culture in which people can more easily build trust with each other, it would seem like that's a no-brainer. Let's do that. And yet again, I often find that people in organizations don't do it so readily. And part of that, I think, is because they don't have a way to talk about trust, hence the book.
Yes. Well, I want to bring a question from the chat. Lars is asking, is what I value in your definition of trust equal to my values? And how would you differentiate between, you know, putting at risk something you value compared to, hey, my values as a human are these?
I think they actually are all part of a continuum of value. So on the one hand, I might value my time at work. And so I'm going to risk trusting that this person will do a good job of something that I'm asking them to do, and they'll just go off and do it, and I don't have to invest more time in kind of redoing it or fixing it or whatever later. So the risk there or the value there is my time. I might also value my reputation. at work. So that's something I value. And so I'm when I'm working with people and trusting them, I'm trusting that they will not do things that might damage my reputation. Um, on a larger scale, maybe larger, my fundamental human values might be, I don't know, integrity, empathy, compassion, um, humor, love. And those things also can be damaged in a relationship if someone does not actually uphold them. So when I make that decision to trust, it's based on the idea that someone else is not going to damage what I have entrusted them with, what I have made vulnerable to them. So let's say empathy is something that is a personal value. I'll just use that one. Um, and someone, I'm displaying empathy in this particular situation because that's who I am and how I operate. And someone makes some sarcastic remark about that, which can undercut the value of my empathy. That would be, I wouldn't trust that person going forward, and I wouldn't want to display empathy. Perhaps I would choose not to trust in that case. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, it looks like it has. So thank you, Lars, for that comment in the chat. So let's talk about the 4 distinctions of trust that you talk about in the book, which could give some more language to us as we think about how to create more trust in our organizations.
Yes. So this framework that I use and talk about and wrote about in the book is essentially taking this big kind of amorphous concept. It's not even really, a concept, we'll call it trust, this thing, and which is kind of hard to pin down. And talking about it in terms of 4 different, what I call assessment domains. That is, we make assessments about other people's trustworthiness, and they make assessments about our trustworthiness in these 4 different domains. It's not just trust, but trust in the domain of care, which is the assessment that, if I'm looking at another person, my assessment is that I can trust them, that they have my interests in mind as well as their own, that they have my back, that they intend good for me. So that's the domain of care. Domain of sincerity is that they are honest. I can believe what they say. If they say something, if they say something that they believe, I can assume that they have done due diligence in looking at it. They're not just believing it for no good reason. So I can trust that they're honest and that they act with integrity. That is, that their words and their actions align. The domain of reliability is where we talk about people keeping the specific commitments that they make to each other. Becky, I'll show up for this webinar at whatever time, and so I'm making a very specific commitment to be there and to be ready and available and all of that sort of thing. So there's this assessment of trust and reliability, and finally the domain of competence, which is that I assess that you have the skills, the expertise, the training background, resources, whatever, to do the job that I'm asking you to do or that you're saying that you can do. So those are the 4 trust domains.
Yeah, let's see if we can repeat those. Care,
competence is 1.
Reliability, and sincerity.
Yes, those are the 4.
Okay. And I'm curious, for those of you who are listening, if you struggle with trust at work, of those 4, which is the one that you get tripped up on the most? Care, competence, reliability, or sincerity? We'll see if people give me an answer in the chat. So in the work that you've done with organizations, Charles, is there one of those that people struggle with more than others?
Well, I keep getting that question from people, and I think the honest answer is that we're all unique in how we show up in the world. And so different people are challenged by in those different domains. So in general, I find that often teams struggle with reliability, which leads to a lack of accountability. So they don't deliver on their commitments to each other as they would like each other to, and things get delayed and slowed up. So there's that issue.
Hmm.
Um, in an engineering organizations, often I'll ask that question, which of the four is most important for you? And 80% of the engineers will say competence. If you're a competent engineer, I can trust you. That's that sort of coin of the realm here. The domains of sincerity and care, though, are also really important, but people have to sort of stop and think about that a little bit.
Mm.
Um, where am I, or where do I show up as not as sincere as I would like to show up? Where am I not 100% honest, or at least as honest as I can be in this context? Um, where do I not really demonstrate my care of other people? How do I do that? One of the ways that for me sometimes shows up is I don't uh, take the time to fully listen to people when things are backed up for me. I tend to, kind of half listen, and that's not satisfying. Doesn't leave a person assessing that they can trust that I really do care about them. So that's an area that I've had to work a lot on.
We had a ton of comments in the chat, so thanks to those of you who took the time to answer. My observation is, Charles, that as you were saying, it really depends on who you are, which of these matters most to you or which you might struggle with. We saw all four of them come up as challenging. So
And I would also say that it really depends on the circumstances. So in different circumstances, you can have, there are different domains that show up as important.
yeah, that makes perfect sense. If you're going to see a medical professional, you both want that competence and care, or
Yes,
if you have a tight deadline, you need that reliability. So that makes a lot of
exactly.
sense to me. So let's talk about some ways that leaders can foster trust within their teams and also create a culture of trust.
Yes. So when I work with teams around trust, one of the things that I'm trying to get across is that in order to foster trust, it really helps to have conversations about it, to talk about it, and to talk about it in a way that everyone on the team um, ends up with a shared understanding of what builds trust among us on this team, for example, and what can damage trust. And that in turn is is greatly helped and supported by having a common language. So the four distinctions that I just, or domains of trust that I just talked about, can really help with that. We can talk now about, well, what builds care? What builds trust in the domain of care on this team? And people can voice that. What builds trust for me? Okay, so I can just, I can voice that and then listen to what other people on the team have to say about that. And then what builds trust in the domain of competence? Are we here with the assessment that everybody's 100% competent? What happens if there's something that you can't do? Having a conversation about how that gets resolved. If you can't do something, is it okay on this team to say, I don't know? Or is that going to cause other people not to trust me? And so working through that, and from a leader's perspective, it's the leader's job to lead those conversations and make sure that they take place and that everyone has an opportunity to participate. And so that's part of it. That's part of building that culture of trust. And then following through with all of that, because it's one thing to say, hey, we want to, one of the things in this team that's important about building trust is that if you don't know something, don't pretend, say it. And then someone makes some remark about how, God, you don't understand that? You don't know that? What's the problem? Which immediately kind of raises red flags for the person who's acknowledged that they don't know something. How is that going to be handled on the team? How's the team going to deal with when someone kind of denigrates or does not support trustworthy behavior on the part of other people? So all of those things go together to begin to create a culture of trust. Another thing that's really important is camaraderie. I've told this story before, but the very first job that I had in a large organization where I was a part of a team, and I also had a team of my own. The leader, my boss, the person who was the leader of the team that I was on, was great at creating trust in the team. He created this culture in which we had camaraderie. We felt we trusted each other. We worked closely together. We collaborated, and a big part of that was the camaraderie that he helped create in a lot of little ways. We did things together as a team, like once every quarter, or I can't remember, really once every couple of months, we'd have a movie night where we'd all go over to somebody's house, have a potluck dinner, and watch a movie. Or in the team meetings themselves, there was certain things that we did that brought out humor and humanity in each other.
Sounds like fun.
It was great. And then I went to work in other companies and discovered that was an outlier. That my first experience was really unusual and unique.
Yeah, I've always been struck by my spouse works in law enforcement, and on the weekends, all weekend, my husband's personal phone blows up with text messages because there is so much like camaraderie and humor and chatting that goes back and forth. Now in our work environment, we don't really tend to communicate with each other on weekends. I don't know necessarily that that's a bad sign, but anytime people are, connected enough that they want to talk to each other outside of work, that is a display of camaraderie.
Yes, as long as they're connecting with each other in a way that they're building relationship. If they're connecting with each other to have a meeting after the meeting to complain about, then that's a different story. I noticed there's a question here that I wanted to, Richard Wilkinson has asked a question that I saw stream by.
Sure.
Is it okay if I address it?
Sure.
He says, how does one deal with inaccurate self-assessments around competence, either thinking they're more competent than they are, don't know what they don't know, or underestimate or understate their abilities? I think that's kind of points to something that's really important, which is self-awareness. Higher self-awareness allows us to be more trustworthy and to trust others more wisely. That is, set boundaries where we need to set them, and at the same time, extend trust when we can and as far as we possibly can. So how do we deal with that kind of thing has a lot to do with being self-aware myself, for example, if I'm in that situation, and then how can I talk with someone else about my assessment that they are not sufficiently self-assessing their own level of competence. in a way that gets it across with them. That's a skill set all on its own. The ability to help someone, guide someone to see that, whichever side of that they're on. And it's really important to be able to do that in order to trust that person. Or if I'm the one who is making an inaccurate assessment of my ability, for me to be able to reassess myself. Great book, by the way, that I'm reading called Rethinking by Adam Grant, his latest book, and he talks all about that. So I'm just going to put that out there as a good resource.
Great recommendation. So thank you for addressing that question in the moment. It's what occurs to me or shows up for me is that it would be easier to talk with someone about the gap in their own assessment of their competence if I had a high level of trust with them.
Yes, yes. Well, exactly. So doing the work to build trust with them first, rather than just hitting them with, hey, you really don't, you really overestimate your ability here. So that's a good point. And it's part of being a trustworthy coworker or a trustworthy boss, or even maybe a trustworthy employee,
Mhm.
is taking the time to build the trust so that I can have the hard conversation, the challenging conversation.
Yes, because there's that, someone earlier in the chat mentioned something about how closely this seems tied to psychological safety. So if I have a high level of trust with you, then I feel more safe to tell the truth, which then builds trust even more. Um, so I'd love to talk for a moment about how we can rebuild trust if there's been some type of breach. Either, and let's talk about both. Let's talk about how do we build trust, rebuild trust on an individual level, and then also how do we build trust within our organization when trust has been broken.
Yeah. So the individual level, and I have a whole chapter in my book devoted to repairing damaged trust, whether it's the other person, someone else has damaged my trust in them. They've done something that I assess is untrustworthy. And I want to try and repair the trust, which means I'm in the position that we just talked about, of having to say to them, hey, what you're doing, I'm having trouble trusting you based on what you're doing. Um, so that's a conversation that's challenging, it's tricky. Um, and if I can do that well, there's some chance that we can begin to rebuild trust. But so I have a set of kind of things to think about, 7 things to think about, um, even before you decide to have a conversation with somebody to try and rebuild trust when you don't trust them. And so I'm not going to belabor that by going through each one of them, because it's a process. But I would strongly recommend, if this is a challenge you're facing, that you get the book and do that for yourself. But then once you've gone through that, really thought it through from that perspective, then you have to actually get into the conversation somehow with that person. And I also talk about 5 steps to sort of get into the conversation that will give it the best chance of being successful. And that conversation, by the way, may not be a single conversation. It may be a series of conversations. But the bottom line, the main point is that it's not going to get rebuilt by ignoring it. If you have a problem with trusting somebody else, trusting their behavior has created a sense of distrust in you towards them, you're not going to repair it by hoping it goes away, hoping it changes, hoping the other person figures it out by you kind of ignoring them, which is what, of course, we tend to do when we distrust someone. Our behavior when we distrust someone looks really untrustworthy to the other person. We withdraw, we put up barriers, we don't talk to them, we avoid them, or sometimes we get aggressive in our conversations with them, all of which puts them off. And none of that is going to help rebuild trust. So the only way that trust is going to be rebuilt in the short term, and I say short term by months or years, is to have a conversation. Maybe time will fix it over a long period of time. Maybe not. I don't know. But in the short term, if you have someone at work that you need to work with and that you're finding it hard to work with them because you distrust them, the only way to get there is to have the conversation with them. And hopefully, also, if you are the one who's damaged trust and you somehow the other person is willing to tell you and initiate a conversation with you about that, you can also be open to that side of a conversation.
Yes, it sounds really scary.
It is. It's challenging. That's why I have a whole chapter on think it through. Here's how you can think it through. Here are the things that will be important to think about. And in terms of getting into the conversation, here are the things that you can say, some variation on these things that you can say that will hopefully help the other person feel less defensive.
Hmm. Well, and I wonder if it isn't helpful to think about the risk or the reward of investing the time to repair that relationship. Because as you mentioned, trust influences all sorts of positive outcomes in our organizations. And so if there's a breach of trust and we choose to ignore it, it to me, it appears that we could have all kinds of difficulties on our teams in terms of productivity and effectiveness. So we must
Yeah.
address these
Yeah, it's got to be
situations.
addressed individually, and then on a larger scale in organizations, it also has to be addressed. If an organization, for example, goes through a reduction in force, big chunk of people are laid off. The people who are still there are going to inevitably have some issues of trust or concerns about how they can trust the management. Well, this happened once. Is it going to happen again? And how well that reduction in force was handled will have a lot to do with the level of trust or distrust that's left behind. But the leadership has to address that directly in order for the trust to be rebuilt between the employees of the organization and the leadership. So
I'm wondering if you have any stories of successful turnarounds, organizations in which, there was a lack of trust and, by applying some of these concepts over time, they were able to see a significant change in their culture toward one of trust.
Yes, I have. The distrust has been the result of different kinds of things. In some cases, it's a management decision to do something like reduce the workforce by a significant number of people. In others, it's just management decisions in general that people disagree with and that have led to problems for people in the organization. And I have certainly seen in organizations where leadership has taken it upon themselves to try and repair that and done so with varying degrees of skillfulness. And that's where one of the things that so in organizations that I've worked with where they're preparing to do that, it's valuable. And many of my colleagues that I also do this kind of work have also been involved with organizations where they've helped the leadership prepare to have the conversations with the organization, within the organization, to do that and do it well, do it effectively and skillfully. If it's not done skillfully, it's actually going to make things worse. And I've seen that as well. I wanted to go back around to, you said, having that conversation, whether it's leadership having the conversation with the organization or one-on-one having a trust conversation. One of the questions that's helpful to ask yourself in preparation for even deciding to have a conversation is, what's the worst that can happen if I have this conversation? What's the scariest thing that I'm looking at? But on the other side of it, what's the cost of not having that conversation? So whether it's me needing to have a conversation with one of my peers, or me as the leader of an organization or part of the leadership team, thinking about having a conversation with the entire organization, which will take some real, which will take some humility, which is, and vulnerability on my part as a leader. It's one thing to say, yeah, I can do that. I can just get out in front of the organization and tell them, yeah, we're going to fix this and everything's good. Something else to really do it skillfully, which will include acknowledgement and vulnerability.
Thank you. That's really helpful. I like those questions as a way of considering how to approach the conversation. So let's talk for a moment about how building trust can contribute to innovation and creativity within organizations. What have you seen?
Yeah, well, I think innovation and creativity only happen when there's sufficient trust and psychological safety in a team or among people who are working together. And trust, by the way, is, in my estimation, a sort of a precursor or foundation for psychological safety, individual one-on-one trust, particularly in the domain of care. So yes, those having trust allows people to really be able to be free and open to think about and express different ideas, be creative, be innovative in ways that when there's lack of trust, I'm not going to say anything. If I say something, somebody's going to laugh at me. I don't want people to laugh at me, or they're going to, cut it down right away. We're not going to talk about it sufficiently long. So so I have a pet. This is the first time I've actually said this in a large kind of meeting setting. So I'm going to put this forward. I have a pet theory. I haven't tested it out. I believe there is someone right now who is a graduate student, PhD student, who is doing some research that will bear on this. I'm hoping that turns out to be the case. So my theory is that greater diversity, when I say diversity, I mean diversity of thought, diversity of background, diversity of ideas, diversity of, so diversity in general, lots of, which can encompass pretty much the entire range of diversity. When there is high diversity on a team or within a group of people that are trying to be innovative, they will be the most successful at innovation and productivity, as a matter of fact, I believe. That's my belief just from observing. So then if there's high diversity and high trust, those two together. If there's low diversity and high trust, that's sort of the second level. That still works pretty well. If there's low diversity and low trust, not very much in terms of innovation and creativity. If there's high diversity and low trust, it's a disaster.
So that's interesting.
That's my observation over time. There's, as far as I know, I've not been able to find any research that would bear that out or negate it. I don't know. But if any of you out there who are listening know about some research, I would love to know about it.
Yes, and we have a couple comments. People would love to see that as a graph. People agree. Allison says it rings true to her last organization. High diversity and low trust is dangerous. So I'm just going to take a moment we do have some more questions and some more time, but we have a special offer for those of you who have joined us today that if you choose to pre-order the book, the new book, The Thin Book of Trust, in its third edition, you can get a free ebook code for the book. So pre-order the print copy or the ebook copy and get an extra free copy to share with someone else. We would love to have you take action on that today as the book is launching September 10th. I pre-ordered mine back in May. It's going to be on my door on September 10th. I can't wait to get it. And so we would invite you to do that. Wendy is going to put a link in the chat, which is a Google form you can fill out to let us know you've pre-ordered. I think we're going to trust you to do that, and then we'll get an ebook code out to you. We would also love your help in spreading the word about the Thin Book of Trust. If this content today has been valuable to you, or if you have past experience with the book, we would love to have you mention the book in your newsletter if you have one, in an email to a friend, or if you have a blog that you'd like to write about the book. We'd love to have you share it on your social media channels. If you're on LinkedIn, you can even connect with or tag Charles. And you can also visit Charles's website, insightcoaching.com, for more resources, including his podcast, which is another great source of learning for you. So we wanted to make sure before we got to the rest of our questions and comments today that you knew how to take next steps with this book and the content. Just a side note, of course, if you've read and enjoyed the book, we would always appreciate your Amazon or Goodreads review as well, as a means of expanding awareness for this topic. I happened to notice that Randy Connolly is on today's call, and he's also a thought leader about trust. Amazing, Randy, that you've invested time in being with us, and thank you for your comments in the chat. All right, so I do have one more question that I've been dying to ask you, Charles. I'm wondering if you would be willing to share some practical advice for leaders who want to enhance their ability to build and maintain trust. So, all of us are going to get back into our work days when this event concludes. And so what are some actions that we could all take today to be able to increase our trustworthiness and our trust in relationships at work?
Well, my first thought is to think about it and have conversations with people, invite conversations about trust and what matters. Not just trust alone, but what matters to each other. So, ask your colleagues, ask your boss, ask the people who work for you, what matters to you, what's important to you, and listen. That listening builds trust, particularly in the domain of care. So really listening to people. If you ask them a question, listen to what they have to say, even ask follow-up questions. So that's one thing you can do to build trust. Beyond that, the value of having a framework and language that you share with other people is really powerful. Whether the framework that I use, or other frameworks out there that are also very good. It's not so much, I'm not going to push my framework. I think it's really good. I've used it for years. It's really been valuable to my clients. But I will say there are other good frameworks out there. The value of having a framework and a way to think about trust and building it is, I think, really valuable and important in trying to do that. So it's not just guesswork. When I was back decades ago working in organizations and leading other people, I knew trust was important. I knew it was important to build trust with the people who work for me and the people I work with and my bosses. And I didn't really have a good way to think about it other than, some basic stuff, be honest, follow through, etc. And so sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. And it was almost like leaving it up to chance. And once I found a framework, it allowed me to be much more consistent and proactive in thinking about how I was going to interact with people in ways that would build trust with them. And in turn, thinking about placing trust in other people is, doing so in a way that's wise, so that I'm not just giving trust away and then getting burned.
Mm. Yes. So I see a question from Lori, and she's wondering what's new about the third edition. How different is this from the other editions? She says she loved it and has gotten so much out of it.
I haven't changed any of the basics. The basic stuff is still there. I've added a few things. I've changed a little bit. There's a chapter on the neuroscience of trust, and I've changed that a bit. One of the things that is new in this edition, completely new in this edition, is a discussion guide. That over the years, I have heard from dozens and dozens, maybe hundreds of people who have said, yeah, we love this book and we've created a little book club around it in our company, or our team uses it, reads it, and is, spending time talking with each other. Do you have any particular questions that we could ask or base our conversations around? And so now this edition has that. There are a set of discussion questions.
Well, and amazing. So I'm going to put together, I saw Lori say the reason she loves the book is because it's thin. I don't know if you can hold up your book for us so we can see it, Charles, how thin it is. But she mentioned that you could read it. You got to hold it up a little higher. Okay, it's thin. Thank you, Charles. So you could read it on a lunch hour, according to Lori. Now we have this new set of discussion questions. And so to me, this sounds like a prime opportunity for professional development. Buy the Thin Book of Trust for your whole team. Let everyone read it over an hour or two, and then use the discussion guide to start these conversations and build a common vocabulary around trust.
Thank you. Yes. And I don't want to set anybody's expectations too high. Personally, I'm a slow reader. It would probably take me more like a couple hours to read it.
Okay, good to know.
But
Good to know.
but in terms of using it with a number of people in your organization, I do want to say that, and I think I saw this flash by in the chat, Barrett Kohler offers great discounts for bulk sales. So if you want to buy a number of books, yeah, go for it.
Yeah,
get in touch through their website. You can order books in bulk with good discounts.
and I think I just saw an email from Barrett Kohler Publishers this morning that starting on their website tomorrow, they're having a buy a book, get a book 50% off deal. So even if you
Ooh.
don't need to buy 10 and get a bulk discount, even if you buy 2 or 3, they've got that special that's starting on September 6th. I have one question I really want to get to, Charles. It's related to building trust in our more virtual world. And so I'm curious what tips you might have. I happen to serve a team that's both in person and remote. It's in person because my COO sits on the other side of the wall and our shipping manager is sometimes here, but the rest of the team is mostly virtual. So for those who might be working in environments that are either a blend of hybrid work or remote work, what are some difficulties in building trust, and how can we build trust more effectively in those virtual environments?
Well, the difficulty is pretty straightforward. Someone who is remote and who I only see on a screen, and I only see them in certain contexts, and I only see them from about here up. Um, it's easier for me to lose sight of their humanity unless I make a bit of an effort to connect with them. If we're all sitting around a table in a conference room, it's easier to kind of be present in a human way. And I'm not saying this very well, but in the virtual world, it basically you have to make an effort, more of an effort, to connect with people in ways that aren't just work related. You're not going to run into them in the break room and have a conversation about something else besides the specific work you're doing. You're not going to run into them in the hallway and have a quick conversation even about the work you're doing, but in a way that's different than you would have in a planned interaction in a meeting on Zoom or Teams. So you actually have to take the time to do it. And that's especially important, I think, for leaders to take that time. The other thing is, in that hybrid kind of world where there's some people that are remote and some people that are in physically with each other in proximity, it's when you have meetings, plan for the people who are remote. And this comes from my good friend Nancy Settle Murphy, who has studied and worked with remote teams for a couple of decades now, and really knows this a lot. But she says, plan for the people who are remote. Make sure that they are taken care of in your meeting context, in your meeting plans, however you do that, so that they're not left out. Because it's easy to plan for the local people. You're all in a room, you're sitting here, and then there's somebody on a screen somewhere that they can easily be dismissed, discounted. They have to work extra hard to show up. If you plan for them and make sure that they're there and present, and their presence is equal in the meeting, that helps a lot.
Those are some great points. So quickly before we wrap up our time together, I'm going to give you a moment in a second, Charles, to send us out with some inspiration or a wrap up. But a reminder that the Thin Book of Trust in the 3rd edition from Barrett Kohler Publishers is coming September 10th. If you pre-order today and use the link that Wendy, my amazing colleague who's been supporting us in the chat today, is putting in the chat for us, the first 25 will get a code for a free ebook. So you'll have a book to give away. And we would love your support in spreading the word about the book this week, next week, into the future. If the book is adding value for you, we'd appreciate you sharing the book with others in the various ways that we previously discussed. And if you need any help with that, we'd always be happy to help you. So Charles, as we wrap up this time together, I want to give thanks to those who have invested an hour of learning with us, and I'm going to send it to you for some wrap-up thoughts.
Thank you, Becky. Well, first of all, I want to thank everyone has invested their time, is out there listening to this, and those of you who might even be listening to this after the fact, and to you, Becky, for being a wonderful host. It's really been a joy talking with you. And in terms of just a sort of a final thought, for me, as I said, trust is an integral part of every relationship we have. And one of the things that you can do for yourself and for the people you are in relationship with is to not take that for granted, but rather pay attention to it. Be intentional about paying attention to building trust in the relationship when you interact with the other person, whether it's professionally or personally. Think about how as you're talking with them, kind of keep it in the back of your mind. Think about, okay, how can I even build stronger trust with this person in this interaction, whatever the interaction is about? And that might simply be just being present with them, being a listener for them, having fun with them in a genuine and honest way, being fully yourself and present. But all of that contributes to building trust in the relationship, and that strengthens the relationship over time and allows you, especially in the workplace, allows you to accomplish things that you just can't without that trust.
Thanks so much. That's really powerful. And it's a really good reminder, and just taking the time to listen and care.
Thank you.